The smell of disinfectant in the emergency room stung my nostrils as Serena's high heels stepped onto the shadow cast by my suit and shoes. Damon. Her voice trembled, her eyes red and bloodshot. Is this what you call a lesson? Breaking ribs and knocking out teeth? I didn't respond. I just stared at the door of the operating room at the end of the hallway, the red light still glowing. Landon was inside, 3 broken ribs on the right side, 2 front teeth knocked out, a slight rupture in his spleen. This was the precise degree of lesson I had ordered, not too much, not too little. Enough to make him remember the pain, but not enough to die by my hands and bring me trouble. Did you hear me? She grabbed the cuff of my suit jacket, her grip so fierce it seemed she might tear the fabric. He's only 26 years old. He's my assistant. What did he do wrong to deserve this from you? You don't know what he did wrong. I finally looked down at her. This woman had been with me for 5 years, and I knew every expression she made, but what I saw in that moment was one I didn't like, pity for a young man who had nothing to do with her, pity so deep that her eyes were full of tears, yet not a single one was left for me. All I know is that you beat a child into this state. She let go of my hand and stepped back, as if she was just realizing that the husband standing before her was a stranger. I don't recognize you anymore. I watched her turn and walk toward the family waiting area outside the operating room, sit down on that row of cold plastic chairs, as if she intended to stay there all night. I didn't stop her. For some things to make sense, I'd have to start from the beginning, only then would she understand that what I did tonight wasn't losing control, it was cleaning house. 3 months ago, I went to her office to pick her up after work, it was our unspoken routine. Every Wednesday, she worked overtime until 8, and I would arrive downstairs right on time, the car playing the jazz music she loved. That day, she was 20 minutes late stepping out of the elevator, accompanied by a young man. His suit was cut in an ordinary style, but he wore it neatly, his cufflinks perfectly fastened, his hair cleanly combed, and his hands carrying a stack of documents and her handbag. Mr. Damon. He spotted me first, his smile polite yet not obsequious, the angle of his bow just right. I'm Landon, Serena's new assistant. I just started last week. Sister Serena, I noted that form of address. Not Miss Serena, not CEO Serena, but Sister. Close, yet restrained, as if the warmth had been practiced countless times to perfection. He works very hard, Serena defended him, a hint of a teacher's pride in her eyes. He stayed late tonight to double-check the contract terms with me, and he caught 2 pitfalls the other side had cleverly hidden. I watched Landon, his head bowed, his demeanor humble, but I noticed the way he placed his bag, not casually setting it down, but lowering it steadily, slowly, with a deliberate display, right at Serena's feet, as if silently telling her, I'm attentive, I'm always thinking of you. That kind of detail isn't natural. It's practiced. I've been in business for 15 years, climbing from a lowly sales clerk to where I am now. I've seen plenty of young men like this, clean-cut, ambitious, thoughtful, every move precisely aimed at their target's weak spot. What's Serena's weak spot? She was too sheltered growing up, never truly suffered, so she can't bear to see others struggle, especially the kind who say, I work so hard but was born unlucky. Assistant Landon, you've worked hard. I extended my hand, and he immediately set down the file, clasping my hand with both of his, applying just the right amount of pressure, neither too firm nor too weak. It's my duty, Mr. Damon. He lifted his head to glance at me, and in that split second, I caught a fleeting glint of assessment in his eyes, not sizing up my wealth, but sizing me up as a person, as if weighing a stone, trying to figure out just how much force it would take to pry me open. That look lasted only a fraction of a second, then he slipped back into that clean, earnest demeanor. I said nothing. After seeing Serena into the car, she kept talking about how sensible and pitiful Landon was, how he had supposedly come from the mountains, put himself through college with student loans, with a chronically ill mother, and shouldering the burden of his whole family alone. When he talked about his mother, his eyes turned red, she said. A kid like that deserves a helping hand. I gripped the steering wheel and said nothing. But a seed of doubt had already been planted in my mind, not because he was poor, not because he was ambitious, but because of the deliberate way he placed his bag, and that split-second assessment in his eyes when he looked up at me. This guy was no ordinary one. 2 months later, at the company's annual gala, I brought Serena along as usual. She wore a moon-white gown I had given her, smiling so warmly and softly that she was the brightest one in the entire ballroom. Landon was there too, attending as her assistant, handling refreshments, organizing the schedule, and executing everything flawlessly. After several rounds of drinks, a few old acquaintances from the investment circle gathered around to toast. The atmosphere was just right. Landon suddenly walked over with a wine glass, his smile perfectly poised. "Mr. Damon, Sister Serena, congratulations on your 5th wedding anniversary. Let me toast to you, wishing you a lifetime of happiness together." Anyone can say pleasantries. But after he spoke, his gaze lingered on Serena's face for an extra half-second, then turned to me with a faint, almost imperceptible hint of provocation, as if to say, "I know you two seem happy on the surface, but I understand her thoughts better." I remained composed and clinked glasses with him. Half an hour later, I went to the restroom. On my way back, I happened to catch them at the corner of the hallway. Landon was whispering something to Serena, her expression conflicted and tinged with a hint of soft-heartedness. "I don't want other colleagues to know about my mom being hospitalized. I'm only telling you because I don't want to cause you any trouble." His voice was very low, deliberately choked with emotion. "Serena, thank you for lending me that money last time. I'll pay you back next month when I get my year-end bonus." Lending money? I stood in the shadows, saying nothing, watching Serena wave her hand. "No need to pay it back. Just take good care of your mom." "Serena, you're so good to me. So good that..." He paused, his voice dropping even lower, nearly brushing against her ear. "So good that sometimes I wish I had met you a few years earlier." The moment he said it, he immediately lowered his head, as if startled by his own words. He hurriedly apologized. "I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn. I'm so grateful to you. I got carried away." Well acted. First show weakness, then cross the line, then immediately pull back, handing all the initiative to the other person, making them feel that he didn't mean it, he's just too innocent and too repressed. I walked out, my voice perfectly calm. "Assistant Landon, a slip of the tongue like that shouldn't happen a second time." He spun around sharply to see me, his face instantly filled with panic and shame. "Mr. Damon, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I know exactly what you meant." I didn't raise my voice, instead, I lowered it even more. That kind of low tone was the one I used when barely containing my anger. Serena could tell, and she immediately grabbed my arm. "Damon," he just said it offhand. "Don't take it seriously. Just a casual remark." I looked at her. "You lent him money and didn't tell me." Serena's face went pale. It's just 10,000. I really felt sorry for him, and I thought. "You don't need to explain the loan to me." I cut her off. "What bothers me is that an assistant who's been here for 3 months would say something like that to my wife in public, and you chose to be soft-hearted instead of keeping your distance." The music in the banquet hall was still playing, and a few people had already noticed the commotion, starting to whisper among themselves. I didn't make a scene right then, that's not my style. Scenes are for people who don't know the rules. I turned and gave a slight nod to the security guard beside me, uttering just 3 words, "See him out." When Landon was politely escorted out by the 2 security guards, his face was filled with shock and grievance, as if he hadn't expected me to handle it this way. But I saw clearly, as they guided him out, his steps showed no trace of panic. Instead, as he passed by me, he shot me a quick glance. There was no fear in that look, it was scrutiny, a reassessment. After the banquet ended, I returned home to find Serena sitting silently on the sofa, her eyes red-rimmed. Do you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill? I poured myself a drink. I think you're a bit frightening. She looked up at me. A kid says one wrong thing, and you have him escorted out, making a public spectacle of him in front of the whole company? Serena. I sat down across from her. Do you know why I married you? She froze. Because you're pure, I said. You have no hidden schemes or twisted ways. You believe kindness deserves kindness in return, and that everyone deserves to be understood. That's what I love about you, and what worries me most. You can't tell who's truly pitiful and who's just taking advantage of your soft heart. You're saying Landon isn't really in trouble? She frowned. His mother being hospitalized is real, him borrowing money is real, and his family living in the mountains is real too. I never said those things were fake. I cut her off. What I'm saying is, he knows how to use real struggles to earn your trust, and then use your trust to get more. Today it's borrowing money, a slip of the tongue. Tomorrow, what will it be? She was silent for a long time before murmuring, "You're overthinking this." I didn't argue further. The next day, I had the lawyer draft a document and placed it before her. The portion of the group's equity under her name was restructured into a trust, managed by an institution I designated. She retained only the dividends, losing the right to direct control. What does this mean? She flipped through the documents, her fingers turning white. It means your judgment has been off lately, and I need an extra layer of protection. I said calmly. Serena, this isn't about not trusting you, it's about not trusting the people who get close to you. You can be angry with me, but this document needs to be signed today. She stared at me for a long time, her eyes filled with hurt and confusion. In the end, she still picked up the pen. One day, you'll understand, I'm not targeting you. I watched her signature fall onto the paper, feeling little sense of triumph. It felt more like seeing a pit ahead, knowing someone you care about is walking straight toward it, and all you can do is tighten your grip on the resources they can use, so that when the ground gives way, at least they won't fall with nothing left. Landon wasn't fired. That was my deliberate arrangement. I suppressed the incident of his slip of the tongue, and only had HR issue a verbal warning, citing youthful indiscretion, give him a chance. This move was bait before I set my next big trap. A person who is easily forgiven will misjudge the situation, thinking they haven't been fully seen through, and will continue to take risks. A month later, Serena received a cross-border merger and acquisition project for the group, requiring a business trip to Southeast Asia. Landon was to accompany her as an assistant. I initially didn't want him to go, but Serena insisted. He's been steady in his work lately, and he knows a bit of both English and the local language. The project needs him. I didn't stop her. Some things, she has to see with her own eyes before she'll truly believe. On the third night of my business trip, I received a call from another person on Serena's assistant team, someone I had planted in advance to relay the real situation to me at a critical moment. Mr. Damon, after the party tonight, Landon made an excuse to escort Miss Serena back to her room. In the elevator, he said a lot of things to Miss Serena, roughly meaning that the person he admires most in this life is Miss Serena, and if one day Miss Serena encounters any difficulty, he would risk his life to help her. Miss Serena's expression was not very pleasant at the time, but she didn't explicitly refuse either. She just said, "Thank you, mind your boundaries," and went back to her room first. Boundaries, Serena was still soft-hearted, she still gave him an out. I didn't wait until the next day. That very night, I booked the earliest private jet and landed before dawn. I didn't alert anyone. I went straight to the room where Landon was staying. When I knocked, he was still awake and opened the door in his pajamas. The moment he saw me, his face changed color, but he quickly regained his composure, even forcing a smile. "Mr. Damon, why are you here in person?" I didn't answer. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to the balcony. The hotel was by the sea, on the 17th floor. Below the balcony, the sea was pitch black, and the wind was howling loudly. Mr. Damon, please calm down." It was only then that real panic set in. His voice trembled in a way that didn't seem fake. "I am calm," I said. "Landon, I don't care how hard your background was, I don't care how badly you want to climb up. I have only one thing to say, my wife is not a stepping stone for your ascent. I didn't mean it that way. I'm truly just grateful to Miss Serena. Grateful enough to tell her you'd risk your life for her." I pressed him further out over the balcony. His entire body hung in midair, both hands gripping the railing for dear life, his face pale as paper. "Tell me, when a 26-year-old says something like that to a married superior, is it gratitude, or something else? Mr. Damon, I know I was wrong. I swear I'll never go near Miss Serena again. Please." His voice was choked with sobs now, tears and cold sweat streaming down his face. I stared at him for a long time. In that moment, his fear looked real enough. But deep down, I knew that fear and giving up are two different things. Someone who's truly made up their mind to back off wouldn't be thinking about how to act more pitiful when their life is on the line. I released my hand, and he collapsed onto the balcony floor, gasping for air. "I'm not going to kill you today." I crouched down to meet his eyes, because I don't want Serena to know I killed you, she would resent me for the rest of her life. "But you need to remember this feeling of hanging here today. Every time you get close to her from now on, it will come back to you." As I left, he was still slumped on the floor, unable to get up. But I caught the look he gave me as he raised his head, not gratitude, not the lingering aftermath of fear, but a bone-chilling calculation, the kind made when someone is backed into a corner, as if he was rethinking his next move on the chessboard. I knew it, this man would not give up easily. Back in Serena's hotel room, she had already heard the news. The commotion at the hotel couldn't be hidden, and someone had filmed a video. She saw me enter, her eyes frighteningly red. "You hung him off the balcony, are you insane, Damon?" "I didn't drop him. He's still alive." I took off my jacket. "Next time, I might not be so restrained." "You didn't need to do it this way at all." Her voice was choked with tears. "He just said the wrong thing. You could have fired him, transferred him, yelled at him. Why do you always have to resort to the most brutal method?" "Because if I took a gentle approach, you wouldn't take it seriously." I looked at her. "Serena, I'm going to ask you one thing today, and I want an honest answer. If it were me hanging off that balcony, would you care?" She froze, offering no reply. "See, you can't even deny it." I laughed, but there was little warmth in it. "The concern you feel for a kid who's only been here 4 months already outweighs the worry you have for your own husband. That's not fair." "I'm not saying it's fair. I'm telling you the truth," I cut her off. "This is a divorce agreement." I took the pre-prepared documents out of my suitcase and placed them on the table. "I'm not really divorcing you, this is a test. If you're willing to sign right now, it proves you still want to fight for this marriage. If you hesitate even to sign, it proves your heart has already started to waver." She stared at the documents, her fingers trembling, tears dripping one by one onto the paper. But in the end, she still picked up the pen and signed her name, except it wasn't the signature of someone willing to divorce. She deliberately added a small line at the bottom of the document, "I'm signing because I still love you, not because I'm admitting defeat." Looking at those words, something in me loosened. But that loosening didn't last long. Landon's injuries were the result of my second altercation. He hadn't actually suffered much physical harm that night on the balcony. A few days later, I had someone deliver a formal beating, clean and efficient, 3 broken ribs, 2 knocked out teeth, the force precisely measured. Enough to keep him in the hospital for 2 weeks, and enough to make Serena lose control with worry. That was the scene from the introduction. Outside the emergency room, Serena kept watch all night. By dawn, the surgery was successful, and Landon was moved to a regular ward. She went in to see him. I didn't follow, but stood by the corridor window, where I could see everything happening inside the room. Sister Serena, why are you here? Landon lay on the bed, bruises still visible at the corners of his mouth, his voice weak. But the moment he saw Serena, a glint flickered in his eyes, not gratitude, but a light of triumph, quickly suppressed. He replaced it with a fragile, guilty expression and said, "Did I cause you more trouble? I'm sorry. Don't speak, just rest." Serena sat by the bedside, her voice choked with tears. "It's my fault for not protecting you, for dragging you down." "No, Sister Serena, it's not your fault." He closed his eyes, as if gathering strength, his voice dropping low. "Actually, I knew this day would come sooner or later." "What do you mean?" "Someone like me, born into this kind of background, trying to climb up, it's always been a gamble with my life." He slowly opened his eyes, looking straight at Serena, a desperate resolve in his gaze. In that moment, the traces of performance on his face faded, as if he had finally let down part of his disguise. "Sister Serena, I'm not a fool. I know why Mr. Damon can't stand me. I like you, I've liked you since the first day I met you. I know it's too much, you're my boss, you're already married, but I can't help it. I crawled out of the mountains in this life, endured hardships you can't even imagine. I thought that as long as I worked hard enough, stayed clean enough, and was ambitious enough, I could get a little closer to you. Now I understand, it's not enough, it will never be enough, because with just a flick of his finger, Mr. Damon can send me back to where I came from." Serena's tears finally fell. "Don't say any more. I don't regret it." He grabbed her hand, his grip light but his stance resolute. "I know I'm nothing, but this life of mine, I fought for it myself. It wasn't a handout from Damon. Sister Serena, if one day you figure it out and want someone who truly puts you first and is willing to risk everything for you, instead of someone who traps you with money and power, I'll be waiting." He delivered this speech with utter sincerity. Every pause, every sob in his voice landed precisely on the rhythm that could most touch the softest part of a person's heart, first self-deprecation, then a vow of loyalty, then a clear line of comparison. Damon represents power and control, while he represents purity and devotion. I saw all of this clearly from outside the hallway, but I didn't rush in immediately. I knew very well that if I barged in and interrupted at this moment, it would only push Serena further away. She needed to walk to that crossroads herself, to make her own choice. Only the answer she chose on her own would truly carry weight. 3 days later, Serena packed her bags and stood at the doorway of our bedroom, her eyes red and swollen. "I want to move out for a while," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Damon, in this marriage, I've always been the one giving in, always being arranged by you. I need some time to figure out what I really want." "Did he put those words in your head, to make you think clearly?" I asked. "Not entirely," she shook her head. "I've realized that no matter how I explain, you've never truly trusted my judgment. You always act first, then make me bear the consequences. I don't know if this marriage is worth continuing." I didn't stop her. Stopping someone who has already made up their mind to leave would only make them more convinced that their decision is right. I said only one sentence: "You can go, but remember, you're not leaving now because you've fallen for someone else, it's because you haven't yet seen who that person really is. When you do see clearly, I'll still be here." She didn't reply, dragging her suitcase away. In the 3rd week after Serena moved out, Landon was discharged from the hospital and also resigned from the company. I knew he had calculated this move perfectly, leaving my company, cutting off direct confrontation with me, while also giving Serena the illusion, "I gave up my job for you, I am clean, I am pure." He rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. Serena would occasionally go over to see him, bringing him things. To outsiders, their relationship seemed so ambiguous it was almost blatant. I didn't lay a hand on him again, first, because I had no excuse. After he resigned and left, it was no longer a matter of harassing colleagues and superiors. Second, I needed to wait for the right moment to make Serena see things clearly once and for all. He delivered himself right into this moment. One rainy night, he arranged to meet Serena at that small apartment, saying he had something important to say. I received word in advance. I didn't stop it, just had someone follow, without alarming them, watching from afar. When Serena arrived, the rain was heavy. She held an umbrella and entered the hallway. Inside, only Landon was there, with 2 cups of hot tea on the table. "Serena, have a seat." He handed her the tea, his tone more serious than usual. "I want to make some things clear to you today, no matter what you think of me after hearing them." "Go ahead." Serena sat down, her expression complicated. "The first time I saw you was at the elevator entrance. Your files fell, and when I picked them up for you, I saw you smile and say thank you." His voice was soft. At that moment, I thought, this woman, her family background, her upbringing, her heart, these were things I could never reach no matter how hard I fought in this life. But I wasn't willing to accept that. "Landon. Let me finish." He interrupted her, his eyes for the first time devoid of that deliberate humility, becoming direct and sharp. "Serena, I admit, when I first approached you, I had a purpose. Damon's company, Damon's resources, and you, these things were my only chance to turn my life around. I calculated many times. I knew this gamble was extremely risky. I might get my bones broken, I might end up with nothing. But I calculated, it was worth the gamble. Because I had nothing to begin with. Losing would only bring me back to square one, but if I won." Serena's expression completely changed. "You've been scheming against me from the very beginning?" "Not exactly." He smiled, and the smile was different from all his previous gentle expressions, carrying a demeanor of having nothing left to lose. "The calculations are real, but my feelings for you are real too. Sister Serena, do you think these 2 things contradict each other?" "They don't. I can like you while clearly knowing that you are my best chance to change my fate. Most people climbing up in this world have walked this path, they just don't say it. I'm saying it today." Serena stood up, trembling all over. "I came today to give you one more chance to explain yourself. I thought you were genuine. I am genuinely fond of you." He stood up too, stepping closer step by step. "But I also genuinely want everything you have behind you. Sister Serena, what kind of life have you lived with Damon all these years? He took away your shares, he resorts to violence at the slightest provocation, he has never truly respected you as an independent person, he only sees you as something he needs to protect and control. With me, you'll get something different, someone who truly cherishes you and is willing to start from scratch with you." Just then, the door was pushed open. I stood at the entrance, with 2 people behind me. Rainwater dripped down my shoulders, and the room fell silent instantly. When Landon saw me, his expression shifted slightly, but he quickly composed himself, even forcing a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. "Mr. Damon, you came after all. I should have come a long time ago." I walked in, my gaze sweeping over Serena. She stood there pale-faced, as if someone had just doused her with a bucket of cold water. "Serena, did you hear that clearly?" She didn't say a word, just stared fixedly at Landon, the shock and disbelief in her eyes yet to fade. "Mr. Damon, what do you plan to do now?" Landon straightened his back. "Keep breaking my bones. I've laid everything out today because I wanted Serena to make her own choice. No matter who she picks, I'll accept it. If you resort to violence now, you'll only make her see more clearly that you can't tolerate any dissenting voice and only know how to solve problems with your fists." I looked at him and suddenly smiled. "You've calculated everything perfectly, Landon," I said. "From the very beginning, when you approached Serena, every time you played weak, every slip of the tongue, every timely retreat just when she softened, you calculated it all with precision. But there's one thing you miscalculated." "What?" "You think that by speaking your mind today, you're in control of the situation." I stepped closer, my voice soft but every word crystal clear. But the truth is, the moment you opened your mouth and said, "I admit I had an agenda," you'd already lost. Because what you don't know is that what Serena can't stand is neither violence nor control, it's deception. Today, you tore down the clean and pure image you'd spent half a year building and showed it to her. You thought confessing would earn you points, but it was actually the last straw that broke the camel's back. I turned to look at Serena. Her tears were already streaming silently, and her whole body seemed drained of strength as she leaned against the wall. "Serena," I said. "I know you've been holding a grudge against me lately. I admit that many times, I act first and explain later, without giving you enough trust and space. But what this man told you today, you should have heard it clearly. What he liked was never you as a person, but what comes with you." She sobbed without a word, then simply turned and rushed out of the apartment, disappearing into the rain. I didn't chase after her. Instead, I turned to look at Landon. "You won half the battle today," I said. "You made her see herself clearly, on that, I'll give you credit. But now, it's my turn." For the first time, a crack appeared in his composed facade. "What are you going to do?" "I will not break your bones again," I said. "Hitting someone is a lesson for those who still deserve a seat at the table. You no longer qualify." I signaled to the people behind me, and they handed over a document, one I had already investigated thoroughly. It was about a high-interest loan he owed back in his hometown, and behind the student loan he took out for college entrance exams, there was also an old case of him embezzling student grant funds that he had deliberately concealed, enough to file a case. "You've put on a clean act all these years, but clean people don't embezzle poverty-stricken student grants to trade cryptocurrency in their sophomore year, lose most of it, and then use fake poverty certificates to scam a new round of grants to plug the hole." I tossed the documents at his feet. "I kept this material for half a year, never using it, just to see how long you could keep up the act. Now, I don't need to watch anymore." His face instantly turned pale, and the hand reaching down to pick up the documents was trembling. "Mr. Damon, this matter. I can explain." "You don't need to explain to me. Explain it to the prosecutor," I said. "But I'll give you a choice, leave this city by tonight and never show up in Serena's or my sight again, and I'll hold on to this file. If the sun rises tomorrow and you're still in this city, or if you dare contact Serena even once, I promise you'll spend the rest of your life in prison figuring out what it truly means to have nothing." He stood there, the rain mingling with his heavy, ragged breaths. After a long, long while, he finally lowered his head, as if all the pretense, the scheming, and the last-ditch gamble had shattered into dust in that moment. "I understand," he said, his voice dry. "Mr. Damon, I concede defeat. You were defeated from the very start." I turned and walked away. "You thought you were gambling on a chance to climb the social ladder, but all you were really doing was betting that a woman would be too soft-hearted to see through you. And the dealer at this table was never fate, it was me." 6 months later, it was winter. Serena still hadn't returned. After that night, she didn't come straight home. Instead, she moved away alone to another city. At first, I thought she just needed some space to cool down. Later, I learned she had filed for a formal divorce, not because of Landon, but quite the opposite. After everything that happened, she needed time entirely her own to figure out whether, over these past years, she had truly been living as herself. I didn't try to stop her. In the divorce agreement, I returned all of the equity trust to her, not a penny less, and added an extra sum for the dividends she should have rightfully received. When people asked what I was after, I said I simply wanted her to leave without owing me anything, and without having to resent me. Over the half-year, I've heard bits and pieces of news from time to time. She opened a small design studio in another city, relying on her own abilities. It wasn't a huge success, but she managed to keep it going. I heard she turned down several investors who wanted to collaborate by leveraging her status as Mrs. Chu, insisting on taking on only projects she truly believed in. Landon left the city, and no news of him ever surfaced again. Once, one of my subordinates happened to spot him in a second-tier city in the south, working as a grassroots planner at a small startup. His life was ordinary, devoid of the desperate, all-or-nothing edge he once had. Some say he's probably completely resigned to his fate, a gambler who truly understood the cost. After bleeding dry once, most would become cautious, even timid. At the end of the year, I saw Serena again at an industry cocktail party. She was wearing a simple dark coat, no longer the moonlight white gown I remembered from before. Her eyes held less of the old tenderness, carrying instead the weariness and calm of someone who had weathered storms alone. We locked eyes across the hall. She looked away first, continuing her conversation with the person beside her. As the party ended, I waited for her at the entrance. She walked over without a hint of surprise, as if she had expected me to be waiting there. "Have you been doing all right lately?" I asked. "Not bad," she said. "There's a lot of work at the studio. When I'm busy, I don't have time to think about anything else." "About Landon," I paused. "Aren't you going to ask me how I dealt with him afterward?" "No need to ask." She smiled, a hint of self-mockery in it. "I can guess your methods." We stood in silence for a while as the cold wind rushed in from the lobby entrance. "Serena," I said, "over these past 6 months, I've come to understand one thing." "What?" "I used to think that as long as I eliminated every threat and kept you protected well enough, you would always stay by my side, always trust me." I looked at her. "But I miscalculated one thing, the very way I used to protect you was also pushing you away. What you've always wanted was never to be protected, but to be respected and trusted." She didn't respond, just listened quietly. "I won't ask you to come back," I said. This realization came too late, but I don't want to pretend nothing ever happened. She looked down at her hands, then raised her eyes to meet mine. In her gaze, there was neither the softness of the past nor the resentment of before, only the sober clarity that follows a storm. "Damon," she said softly, "you're right. But understanding the truth doesn't mean we can go back. Some things, once broken, still have cracks even when glued back together. My life now, though difficult, is real. I no longer have to wonder if the people around me truly care for me or want something from me. That sense of security, I refuse to give it up." She nodded at me, turned, and walked into the night without looking back. I stood at the entrance of the gala hall, watching her silhouette disappear into the parking lot lights, and suddenly felt a wave of exhaustion. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that follows a hard-fought battle, but something deeper, an indescribable emptiness. I had won that game, eliminated all threats, safeguarded her judgment, protected her wealth, and even corrected her perception in the end. Yet the one thing I couldn't hold on to was her willingness to come back to me. The group's market value rose by 30% that year. The name Landon was never mentioned again in the entire circle, like a grain of sand ground to dust, as if it had never existed. My driver pulled the car around. I got in, leaned back against the seat, and closed my eyes. My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant about the next quarter's merger plan. I opened my eyes, swiped the screen, and began jotting down comments. Life had to go on, the game continued. On the cleared ground, new seeds had to be planted. But this time, I didn't rush to place the next person on this vacant lot. Some lessons are bought with real money and real feelings, they're worth remembering for a long time.